In 2014, my wife Alina and I were happily married. I was 26 years old, and she was 27. We had been together for 5 years, marrying after dating for 2 years. We met at a college party, where we quickly bonded over shared interests. Alina was studying accounting, and I was pursuing a degree in mechanical engineering. Our relationship blossomed, and soon after, we tied the knot. Alina had an older sister named Adriana, who was married to a man named Ariel, a friend of Alina's. Unfortunately, Alina's mother, Valentina, never accepted me. She constantly found ways to criticize our relationship and humiliated me whenever she could, insisting that Alina deserved someone better. Despite this negativity, I felt that my life was going well. Alina was incredibly beautiful, and we were financially stable, having agreed to wait before having children so we could travel and pay off our house. A year after our wedding, Alina's mother had a minor fall that resulted in her hospitalization. The doctors assured us it was nothing serious, but the incident deeply affected Alina. During a party celebrating Alina's parents' 30th wedding anniversary, 2 shocking announcements were made. Adriana revealed that she had been struggling with infertility for 5 years, undergoing various treatments and fertility clinics without success. The room fell silent as we absorbed this heartbreaking news. Valentina then confessed, tearfully expressing her desire to become a grandmother, emphasizing her urgency by stating that life was unpredictable, and she feared she might not have much time left. This revelation struck Alina hard, and I noticed how deeply she was affected. I tried to remain supportive, but I was also unsure how to handle the emotional turmoil that had just unfolded. Weeks passed, and Alina became increasingly withdrawn. I ignored the signs, thinking it was a phase, but then I received a distressing call from her. Alina was at the hospital because Adriana had attempted self-harm, overwhelmed by her inability to conceive and the pressure from our mother. This news shattered me, and when I rushed to the hospital, I found Valentina, her expression cold and accusatory. I felt an overwhelming sense of blame directed toward me, as if my presence and my marriage to Alina had contributed to Adriana's despair. After a few days, Adriana was released from the hospital with a prescription for antidepressants. In an attempt to address the ongoing issue of grandchildren, we gathered for a family meeting. I suggested adoption as a viable solution, believing it could provide Adriana and Ariel the family they longed for. However, Valentina shot down the idea, insisting that adopting a child would never be the same as having a biological grandchild. The conversation ended awkwardly, leaving tension hanging in the air. In the following weeks, Adriana and Ariel visited our house more frequently. Their demeanor fell off, and I could sense an underlying tension. Alina's behavior also changed. She became distant and reserved, often avoiding my attempts to connect. Our intimacy diminished significantly, which worried me. Then on July 5th, I returned home to find several cars parked outside. My heart sank as I entered the house and saw my in-laws, Adriana and Ariel, along with Alina, gathered in the living room. Their serious expressions made it clear that something was amiss. Alina asked me to sit down, and before I could voice my concerns, Valentina interrupted, demanding to know what solution I could provide for the situation regarding grandchildren. I was bewildered and tried to suggest in vitro fertilization, but Valentina's face twisted in disgust. Suddenly, Valentina proposed an entirely different solution, and as she spoke, I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. Alina looked at her sister and mother, while I tried to grasp what was happening. I remained silent, waiting for my wife to explain. Instead, she yelled at me to say something. I was at a loss for words, struggling to comprehend the gravity of the situation unfolding before me. Alina's silence and the mocking expressions on her family's faces only deepened my confusion and anxiety. Then, the unthinkable happened. My wife left me a note saying she was off to get pregnant with her sister's husband, Ariel. I felt an overwhelming mix of betrayal and despair. I packed my things and decided to ghost her, unable to face the reality of what had just transpired. Alina is now begging for forgiveness, but I'm left grappling with the hurt and the choices that led us here. My mother-in-law, in her usual condescending manner, attempted to calm Alina, addressing her with a certain elegance that felt almost mocking. You know, dear, Adriana has been cursed with the impossibility of giving us grandchildren, she began, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. Alina, unable to hold back, interjected to explain that they had discussed options, outlining the risks associated with surrogacy, including potential genetic and hereditary issues that could arise in future generations. Ariel then added that surrogacy was prohibitively expensive, and they simply could not afford the additional expenses a baby would incur. I was taken aback and asked my mother-in-law what she proposed instead. Her chilling response left me momentarily speechless. Since you refuse to have children, Alina will become pregnant with Ariel, she stated matter-of-factly. I swallowed hard, unable to respond, hoping against hope that this was some sort of cruel joke. But my mother-in-law continued, "We understand that you don't want to take care of the baby. Don't worry. Once it's born, we'll register it in the name of Adriana and Ariel." She proceeded to lecture us about the sanctity of children, declaring that they are not products or commodities, but should be conceived through love, in other words, through sexual intercourse. She even invoked a series of religious arguments, citing the church's prohibitions and her desire to ensure that her grandchild wouldn't be condemned to hell. Before she could delve deeper into her tirade, I stood up abruptly, my voice rising in a way that was uncharacteristic for me. "No way!" I shouted. Alina looked at me with a mix of confusion and fear as my mother-in-law glared defiantly, seemingly shocked by my reaction. Ariel stepped forward, attempting to place a hand on my shoulder, but I recoiled, my anger boiling over. I reiterated that they were being ludicrous. My mother-in-law insisted that she simply wanted a grandchild, and in a moment of sheer frustration, I responded, "Fine, I'll give her a grandchild. We'll try to conceive next week." She quickly interjected, trying to manipulate the conversation once more, saying, "We respect your decision not to have children yet. We understand that you are young and still want to explore. Therefore, Ariel will take care of it." My wife had agreed that her son should be conceived in an act of love, which she claimed meant it should be between Alina and Ariel. At that moment I snapped, "You're crazy, you old witch." My outburst caught everyone off guard, eliciting shocked gasps. My mother-in-law feigned tears, while Julio and Adriana rushed to her side. Alina, visibly upset, shouted at me, demanding to know how I could say such a thing. Ariel approached me, trying to calm the situation, suggesting it would be fun, but I was beyond reason and lashed out physically, landing a punch on Ariel's face that sent him crashing to the floor. The scene erupted into chaos as Adriana and Alina screamed in shock. I demanded they leave my house and locked myself in the bedroom. I could hear the shouting and saw them leave through the window. When Alina finally came back in, she was clearly upset and complained about my behavior, stating that I had offended her mother while ignoring the fact that they had just proposed an outrageous idea about my wife sleeping with another man. Alina didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. The following morning, I awoke to find Alina in the kitchen, her face swollen from crying. She called me immature for not understanding the situation, mentioning that her mother was in critical condition. I chose to ignore her and told her to take a taxi to the hospital. I spent the day with my best friend Abraham, who supported me in my belief that my mother-in-law was at fault for the chaos. He suggested we consider leaving the city to distance ourselves from her family. When I returned home that night, Alina was still upset. She revealed that her mother was hospitalized and in critical condition. I admitted that I didn't care much about it, which caused her to collapse emotionally. Seeing her so distressed filled me with regret. I hadn't intended to hurt her, but she insisted her mother just wanted a grandchild. I argued that her mother could wait another year. But Alina worried that Adriana was still depressed and feared she might attempt self-harm again. I remained silent for a moment, then reluctantly agreed to try for a child soon. That decision was unexpected. I had my own ideas about wanting to travel and not being ready for the responsibilities of parenthood. I felt that maturity wasn't merely a function of age. It involved being ready for the challenges that come with being a parent. Alina looked relieved and happy, stating that we would try to have a child soon. Days passed without incident, except for a noticeable change in Alina's demeanor. She no longer hit her phone and appeared genuinely happy. Even my mother-in-law apologized for her previous behavior and seemed to genuinely understand my decision, which surprised me. Alina became increasingly affectionate, and I recognized that those months had been quite fulfilling, even if something still felt off in our dynamic. 6 months later, I found myself more in love with Alina than ever. I became attentive to her needs, surprising her with gifts like a new TV or spa days. It felt rewarding to prioritize her happiness, especially since I had recognized that my previous words and actions had hurt her. Valentina no longer pressed the issue of grandchildren, and Adriana seemed to be improving. I wanted to plan a special surprise for Alina. I had saved up for a vacation to Canada, hoping to take her away for a break from all the stress we had been enduring. On March 6th, I returned home from work, excited with the tickets in hand, ready to share the news of our upcoming adventure. However, when I walked in, I found the house empty. As I went upstairs to the bedroom, I noticed a note from Alina. It read, "Louis, you see that nothing in our relationship changes. I love you more than ever, and I know you love me too. My mother has become more affectionate toward you and appreciates you in her own way. However, Adriana cannot be happy, and I know that the guilt of not giving her a grandchild is consuming her. I haven't told you this before, but I know you'll understand. You've changed a lot in these past months, and I know you're mature enough to handle this. My parents, Adriana, and Ariel are going to do what we planned 6 months ago. Today, we are leaving town. I will get pregnant by Ariel. I won't tell you where we are going because I want to protect you from any stressful situations. And Ariel might get nervous, too. We may not conceive on the first try, which is why we'll be gone for a month. Don't bother looking for us. I will return when I'm pregnant. This won't change our relationship. We'll pretend that nothing happened. No one in the family knows, and that's how it will stay, just between us." As I finished reading the note, an overwhelming sense of sadness and humiliation washed over me. I cried, feeling deep hurt from her betrayal. But I also believe that in a marriage, mutual agreement and trust must serve as a foundation. Alina didn't seem to care about that, and it shattered me. The turmoil began with a shocking conversation initiated by my mother-in-law, who attempted to calm down Alina while speaking with a certain air of elegance. She lamented how her daughter Adriana had been cursed with the inability to bear children, expressing her desire for grandchildren and the joy that motherhood brings, which Adriana would never experience. Alina, my wife, interrupted her mother, explaining that they had analyzed various options, including surrogacy, and highlighted the associated risks, such as potential genetic and hereditary problems that could emerge generations later. Ariel, her brother, then added that surrogacy was prohibitively expensive, making it an impractical option, given the additional costs a baby would bring. When I asked my mother-in-law what she proposed as a solution, her sinister suggestion left me utterly speechless. She stated, since she refused to have children, Alina will become pregnant with Ariel. My heart sank as I struggled to comprehend the gravity of her words, desperately hoping it was a cruel joke. But my mother-in-law continued, dismissing my disbelief. She reassured me that they understood my reluctance to care for a baby, suggesting that once born, the child would be registered in the names of Adriana and Ariel. Then, she went on to preach about the sanctity of children, stating that they were not mere products created in laboratories, but should be the result of love and intimacy between a couple. Her words turned into a religious discourse, citing the church's prohibition against anything other than conventional conception, as well as her wish to prevent her grandchild from being condemned to hell. Before she could elaborate further, I felt an uncontrollable surge of anger. I stood up abruptly and shouted, "No way!" I typically didn't raise my voice, but the situation demanded it. Looking over at Alina, I saw her expression shift from confusion to fear, while my mother-in-law glared at me defiantly, attempting to justify her outrageous proposal. When Ariel approached, trying to place a reassuring hand on my shoulder, I rejected his gesture vehemently, still reeling from shock and anger. My mother-in-law insisted that all she wanted was a grandchild, and in that moment of frustration, I blurted out that I would give her a grandchild. I told them we could try to conceive soon, yet my mother-in-law continued to interject, noting that they respected my decision to postpone parenthood, acknowledging that I was young and still curious about life. She insisted that Ariel would be responsible for the child, as Alina agreed that her son should be conceived in love. At that moment, I erupted again, shouting, "You're crazy, old witch!" My outburst caught everyone off guard, and my mother-in-law began to shed crocodile tears. Julio, her husband, and Adriana rushed to console her. Alina shot me a furious look and demanded to know how I could speak to her mother that way. I was overwhelmed with anger, realizing they were trying to convince me that Alina should engage in sexual relations with her brother to fulfill their desires for a grandchild. In the heat of the moment, I told them to leave my house and locked myself in the bedroom, hearing their shouts as they left. Minutes later, Alina entered, visibly upset, accusing me of offending her mother. She seemed oblivious to the fact that her family was attempting to persuade me to accept a deeply hurtful proposition. Throughout the day, she remained silent, and when I awoke, I found her in the kitchen looking distraught. She called me immature for not grasping the gravity of the situation, and revealed that her mother had been hospitalized and was in critical condition. I ignored her pleas, refusing to take her to the hospital, and instead suggested she take a taxi. Afterward, I spent the day with my best friend Abraham, who offered me support. We had a couple of beers as I confided in him about the mess my life had become. He expressed disbelief over my mother-in-law's actions and suggested it might be wise for us to leave the city to distance ourselves from her family. When I returned home that night, Alina was still upset, claiming her mother was in serious condition. I shrugged off her distress, stating I didn't care. This remark caused her to collapse in tears. Realizing I had hurt her, I felt a twinge of sadness and apologized, emphasizing that I never intended to hurt her. She expressed her fear that her mother might attempt self-harm due to her despair over not having grandchildren. I agreed that we could try for a child soon, not because I wanted to, but to alleviate the pressure on her family and my wife. As the days passed without incident, I noticed a shift in Alina's behavior. She no longer hid her phone from me and was more affectionate, as though she was trying to mend the rift that had formed. My mother-in-law even apologized for her earlier demands, claiming she understood my need for space. It seemed like both Alina and her mother were slowly coming to terms with my reluctance to have children, and I started to feel a sense of happiness returning to our relationship. However, I couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling that something was amiss. It was during this time that I realized I had become more devoted to Alina. I prioritized her happiness above my own needs. Whether it was buying her a new television or treating her to a day at the spa, I was eager to please her. I thought about the surprise vacation I had planned for us in Canada, a trip I had been saving for, to escape from the stressful situation surrounding us. On March 6th, I arrived home with tickets for our upcoming trip, only to find the house empty. I went upstairs and discovered a note from Alina. It read, "Louis, you see that nothing in our relationship changes. I love you more than ever, and I know you do too. My mother appreciates you, and Adriana is still unhappy. I know that the guilt of not giving her a grandchild is consuming her. I hadn't told you, but I know you'll understand that you've changed a lot in these months. My parents, Adriana, and Ariel are going to do what we planned 6 months ago. Today we are leaving town. I will get pregnant by Ariel. I won't tell you where we are going because I want to spare you from any stress. I know we might not conceive on the first try, so we will be gone for a month. Don't look for us. I will return when I am pregnant. This does not change our relationship. We will pretend that nothing happened. No one in the family knows, and that is how it will stay, just between us. Reading her note filled me with a profound sadness and humiliation. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It hurt deeply, and I shed tears over the betrayal. In a marriage, I believe there should be mutual agreement and trust, yet Alina seemed to disregard that entirely. I felt utterly abandoned. 2 days later, I realized something critical. I had been manipulated. Both Alina and her mother had persuaded me to see myself as the obedient husband who forgives everything. But I was not going to let them walk all over me any longer. Determined to confront this betrayal, I drove to Alina's parents' house, but they weren't there. I returned home, feeling a mix of annoyance and humiliation. I told Abraham about the situation, and we had a couple of beers together. When he asked what I planned to do, I was at a loss for words, so I simply said nothing. I attempted to call Alina, only to find she had left her phone behind. It was evident to me that this was intentional, as she always charged it. I decided to check her phone. The messages and conversations with her family seemed entirely normal. Nothing unusual stood out. That weekend, my feelings of anger towards her and her family grew. In essence, my wife was cheating on me repeatedly with her brother-in-law, supposedly because he was too nervous to conceive, which I found absurd. I devised a plan. I bought tickets to Canada, packed my belongings, and calculated that I had enough savings to sustain myself for 3 months. I sold my car and even asked Abraham for a loan. I told him I was leaving for Canada and planned never to return. He understood and said he would keep me updated on what happened back home. I took Alina's phone with me, fully aware that she was not deserving of it anymore. What I hadn't shared earlier was that I spoke 2 languages fluently, in addition to my native Spanish. I also understood English and German well, which meant language would not be a barrier. I quit my job, requesting they not contact me again, including Alina. By my 3rd week in Canada, a WhatsApp notification popped up on Alina's phone. I opened it to discover a group chat filled with Alina's family members, including her sister, mother, and father, titled Baby. Adriana had sent a message announcing, "It's finally happened, family. After more than 20 attempts, we will finally have a grandchild." She had shared a photo of Ariel smiling, a face I would never forget, with Alina beside him in bed, dressed in nothing but her underwear. Following that was a photo of a pregnancy test. Seeing my wife with Ariel filled me with an overwhelming sadness, but I was far away and wanted to distance myself from the pain of her betrayal. Messages flooded in from the family, congratulating them on the news. 4 days later, I was actively seeking a job in Canada. Thankfully, my engineering background and language skills allowed me to secure a position in a small factory, working as a warehouseman. Though it wasn't ideal, it provided. After the painful events surrounding Alina's betrayal, I found myself grappling with a flood of emotions, ultimately leading me to the decision to remove myself from the toxic situation. To begin, I set my social media profiles to private without deleting Alina or her family, opting instead to hide their accounts. I also acquired a new phone, which became my main line of communication with Abraham, my close friend. He provided updates on Alina's attempts to reach me, revealing that she had visited him, but he refused to let her in. When she pressed him for information about my whereabouts, he boldly responded, "You could have asked him while you were fooling around with your brother-in-law," before shutting the door in her face and threatening to call the police if she continued to pester him. During this time, I reassured Abraham that I was doing well, expressing my relief that Canada was peaceful and prosperous, with milder weather than I anticipated. When I finally turned my old phone back on, I was overwhelmed to find over 100 missed messages and calls from Alina and her family, primarily from her. Alina's messages were filled with desperate pleas for forgiveness, filled with phrases like, "Louis, please, I still love you. This means nothing. I want to give you your first child. This is for my sister. Don't ignore me. Please answer me. I love you." Her tone was frantic, complete with audio recordings of her crying and begging for another chance. Additionally, I received several messages from my mother-in-law, who criticized my behavior, labeling it irresponsible and asserting that my actions could negatively affect her grandchild. She even mentioned that Alina was losing weight due to worry, which led to her being hospitalized for a nervous breakdown. In response to this, I chose to block my mother-in-law's number, prioritizing my mental health during this tumultuous time. Over the first year after moving to Canada, my father came to live with me. It turned out to be a blessing. He was doing well, and I secured a better job. My life started to stabilize, and I eventually achieved permanent residency in Canada with the help of a competent lawyer. Despite everything, Alina continued to send messages, and it became clear that she was struggling. She claimed that the illegitimate child she had with her brother-in-law was healthy, and I felt relief knowing the baby was fine, innocent in this entire mess. Alina eventually severed ties with her family, blaming them for pressuring her into having a child with Ariel. Nonetheless, she persistently sought to locate me. Each time I received her messages, I responded with cheerful emojis, relishing her desperation. Despite her insistence that she still loved me, I couldn't help but think that if she truly cared, she wouldn't have acted the way she did. Out of curiosity and perhaps a lingering sense of connection, I agreed to answer a video call from Alina one day. I intentionally kept my camera off. I didn't want her to see my face. When she appeared on the screen, I was struck by how much she had changed. The vibrant, beautiful woman I once knew looked worn out and aged. As she attempted to apologize, I made it clear that our conversation would be brief. I told her that her actions defined her, emphasizing that she made a choice to override my feelings about our situation. I explained, "You confuse my love with obedience, and that's something I won't allow. I'm living my life, traveling as I promised, but I'm doing it alone. Maybe by this time, we would be expecting a child, but patience is a virtue that is cultivated." I reassured her that I wouldn't grant her a divorce, indicating that she would have to live with her conscience. As I concluded our call, I heard her break down in tears, which only reinforced my resolve to move on from our relationship. Currently, I reside in Montreal, focusing on healing from the scars of my past life. Since that call, I haven't heard from Alina again. It was around 2019 when we last spoke. As the world shifted dramatically in 2020 due to the pandemic, time seemed to blur, making it feel like the events surrounding Alina and me were almost fictional. I apologize for sharing such a lengthy story, but I wanted to express my experience. I would appreciate hearing your opinion on my situation. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. And if you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe for more content. Have a good day.